So, good morning from India and the Middle East, and good evening to everybody in the USA. We're very happy to welcome you to this webinar on India Giving Day and combine it with our World Caregiver Days, a very important day for a lot of us. And the objective of us all gathering together here today is to really understand the challenges and the gaps faced by caregivers, irrespective of their location. We are focusing on the South Asian diaspora here and looking at the particular challenges that we face, especially for those who don't live with their parents or who don't live close to where their loved ones are. And so caregiving has the additional dimension of geographical distance attached to it. We are also here to talk about what are some of the possible solutions that can be implemented through community participation in caregiving, and suggest ways in which the care economy can be more equitable for those of us who are in the space of caregiving and have multiple challenges to juggle in life. So we're going to be speaking with four panelists today, and each of them has had a unique experience in this journey of caregiving and are going to bring their insights to this conversation. We will go around the room once, listening to each of our panelists and their stories, and then we will have a conversation with them. And towards the last 15 minutes, we will invite questions from the audience. If anyone in the audience has a question or a comment or a reflection, the chat box is open to you, and we will take those comments and questions towards the end of this webinar. So with that, we're going to begin. And my first speaker for today is Nishant Singh. Nishant is a very accomplished he's quite accomplished in many ways, and he leads the design and development of global philanthropic institutions and ecosystems, leadership collaboratives, multi-stakeholder projects with governments, multilateral agencies, and the private sector. And he has been a Fulbright graduate scholar at Harvard University. He's a Salzburg Global Fellow and a Young India Fellow at Ashoka University in India. So, Nishant, I'm going to come to you first. And what I'd really like to ask you is um, to share your personal story, emphasizing. Can we just have can we have Nishant on the screen, please? Or we can have all the panelists shine. That's all right. Nishant, I'm going to ask you to please share your personal story, emphasizing the impact on caregiving on mental health specifically. So let's begin with you, Nishant, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Smriti. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's joining from all over the world. Glad to see a lot of familiar names and people in the attendees as well. I think my caregiving journey started right at the start of 2019. I was working in Delhi at that time, and I randomly got a call. I still remember the date, 5th of January, 7 o'clock in the morning. I get a call from my mother, and it's early morning, and I missed the call. I reached my office by 8 o'clock, and by then my mom has already called me like 2-3 times. And then when I pick it up, she's panicking. Dad had suddenly started experiencing seizures, and she had no idea of what to do. She was in Dehradun at that time. We are from Dehradun, a valley right at the base of Himalaya mountains in northern part of India. I still remember clearly her words, "Beta, please come home," which essentially was a cry for help. I had no idea of what was happening, but the next thing I did was somehow get onto the next flight from Delhi to Dehradun. And when I reached there, by that time, my family and my neighbors, they've already taken my dad to the nearest hospital. And there, the doctors cannot figure out why he's having seizures. Absolutely no idea. What started that day was a harrowing journey for the next 1 year, where I had to keep taking my dad to different hospitals, from Dehradun all the way to Delhi, both public and private hospitals. It was after 5 hospitals that he was finally diagnosed with having developed an autoimmune disorder. Um, One of the key moments I remember when I was taking my dad out from the hospital in Dehradun was the doctor made me sign something called a LAMA form, LAMA, Leave Against Medical Advice. Uh, the doctors I had been in touch with, they recommended that I take my dad to Delhi for diagnosis and treatment. And I have no idea of what a LAMA entails. And standing there, none of us have slept. The doctor is trying to explain that once you sign this medical form, the hospital will take absolutely no responsibility of anything that happens to your father. Uh, we will not be able to provide any kind of medical support after you have signed this form. The road from Dehradun to Delhi goes through these mountainous routes where sometimes you have no internet connection. And so sitting there, waiting right next to the ambulance, I am wondering that I'm signing a document, which will basically determine whatever happens to my dad next from here on. And at that age, right, it's a very challenging prospect. As an only child, you have a mother waiting outside whose hopes are on you. And you're signing a document for which you will be responsible for the rest of your life. And nobody trains you or teaches you for these things, right? Throughout the 5.5 hour long ambulance journey, my only hope was that nothing happens to my father. And that triggered a multi-year journey in becoming a caregiver. That experience of missing my mother's call just triggered something so deeply in me that I used to keep my phone right next to me all the time. So much so the fear was so high that even when I reached Harvard for my graduation, and my classmates used to often marvel at my ability to always be very prompt with responses whenever they reached out. What they did not realize was that I was keeping my phone on me all the time simply because I did not want to miss a call from my mother. I used to have schedules of flights going to Dehradun, Delhi, printed and ready so that if an emergency call came, I was always ready to jump on it. The fear, that the desire to be the first respondent, it was so overwhelming and overpowering that throughout that journey, I barely prioritized what I needed or what I wanted to experience. The thought that there is a father who needs to be taken care of, who needs to be provided medical support, whether I'm remote, whether I am there in India, that was all consuming. And it took several years of therapy to unlearn that. Uh, Even while a lot of my friends, we were figuring about what our career choices are going to be, I already knew that my career choices are going to be based on what my family's requirements are. Somehow always wanting to be close, never choosing not to settle in the US, knowing that at some point I have to head back to take care of my parents. Unwiring that brain, which is always ready to just jump and provide care, it's been a very challenging experience because it also gets mixed with the guilt that you're not doing enough, uh, and it drains you out of patience. You see uh, other friends and families which may not be experiencing these challenges, and initially you regret it. Sooner or later, after having conversed with doctors all over India, I started developing a sense of gratitude towards this. And this is not to glorify the struggles, despite all the privileges some of us have. But it is just to highlight the aspect that once you become a caregiver, there is no going back. right? And I used to read a lot about, what caregiving entails. And one of the lines that has always stayed with me is how you don't uh, give care, you become a caregiver. Uh, Luckily, I have not been the only one on this journey. Uh, a lot of my friends from across the social strata have also gone through these struggles. And these struggles don't just limit to your personal challenges. On a day-to-day basis in India, especially, right from getting an appointment with the doctor, uh, to bringing your parents there, to I used to go to AIMS New Delhi at 7:30 in the morning for an appointment that used to start at 9:30, and it could go anywhere till 1 p.m. And at 6 o'clock, that AIMS OPD is jam-packed. Those of you who've seen visuals of Kumbh Mela, that's exactly what the OPD looks like, because uh, to take your parents at that age through such a grueling experience, giving them hope and support that don't think about the crowd, you only need to think about your 10 minutes with the doctor. Uh, all of these are the invisible aspects of caregiving. Uh, Many of us are in very intense jobs where we are constantly optimizing for driving outcomes, for metrics that will go in deciding how well the year went. And for some of us who are caretakers, the invisible work of caregiving is always at the back of our mind, that we have to prioritize and reserve some of our energy uh, for our loved ones. And those are aspects that do not get counted when you talk about careers, that you talk about performance at work. Uh, so it is all encompassing. It affects all parts of your life. And more challenging has been the realization that as our society, we moved from a joint family structure to a nuclear family and now atomic families. The community you can actually rely on till this date has slowly reduced. In Dehradun, most of the students who grow up studying in Dehradun, they don't end up living there, which also means that most of the friends you grew up with are no longer there. Who do you rely on? And in the places you grew up in, almost everyone who was your parents' age, they have all turned old. So they themselves need caretakers. So there's a subtle part of your brain that is always preparing for emergencies. You always have phone numbers of ambulances, doctors, uh, instant responders ready. Every time I visit my hometown, I make sure I meet my friends and I keep telling them that please visit home while I'm not around, so that my parents don't feel lonely. So even when the medical journey ends, the desire to protect and take care of your parents, that never ends. And over the years, I have learned that this, for whatever said and done, this incidence, this responsibility has given me a lot of focus uh, on what truly are the most important things in life. And the only way I have learned to cope and navigate this with a sense of balance is to just feel gratitude that I'm getting to do whatever I'm getting to do, be in the moment, and just treat each day as it is coming rather than paralyze myself thinking of the worst case scenarios that could happen. I'll stop there, Smriti, and I'll wait for instructions. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Thank you very much, Nishant, for sharing so openly and with so much honesty and vulnerability. And you've really sort of set the tone for what we are here to discuss today. This idea that we need to be first responders, and it can be. And the fact that caregiving is a role that is, you never shake it off, but let's also remember it's a role that is acquired overnight with no warning. And so you're learning on the go. And from what I understand from your story, I think this is pretty universal for all caregivers. We inhabit a pretty lonely universe, which is, where our co-inhabitants are guilt and anxiety and hypervigilance. And even though we may have a community to reach out to, it's still a pretty lonely journey being a caregiver. So there are several points that you made that are, sitting with me, which I will come back to in our conversation round. I'm going to for now move across to Najwa. Najwa Makbul is an educator and a social impact professional with expertise in designing and implementing context-specific programs, community engagement, and relationship building. Currently, Najwa is a learning and engagement manager at Toddle, and for the last 8 years, she has also been a full-time caregiver to her mother, a role that shaped her commitment to equity, fostering commitment of care and impact-driven work. I'm really inspired by the fact that, so far what I've heard from Nishant and what I've just read out about Najwa, to how much of caregiving really sort of chisels our vision for who we are in the world. So, Najwa, my question to you to start us off is also to ask you to please share your personal story and perhaps some of the ongoing challenges as a current caregiver that you're facing. I mean, you've been doing this for 8 years, and it has been quite relentless. So, would really love to hear from you what your journey has been.
Thanks, Smriti. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So when Smriti reached out and asked me to share about my experience as a caregiver, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to share, but also because I rarely stop to think about what caregiving has meant to me and what it means to me. You sort of don't get the luxury of reflection when you're always anticipating the next crisis, making contingency plans, ensuring nothing slips through the cracks. So the way I see it, caregiving is like driving at like 100 miles an hour, and you're afraid to hit the brakes because stopping might mean losing control entirely. So you're caught up in it. You don't even think that slowing down is an option at all. So very grateful for this opportunity that made me stop and think hard about how caregiving has impacted and influenced my life. I don't think I would have ever sat and done this otherwise. So I think this was very needed for me. I don't think any of us expect that we'll be in this position ever or plan for it. My mom's diagnosis caught us all by surprise. And I remember sitting in the hospital listening to the doctor lay out the treatment plans. And I instinctively knew that my life as I knew it, work, person plans, everything else was about to be put on hold. But what really stands out more is the moment I knew that the decision was made for me. I think we'd taken my dad to an oncologist for a second appointment, taken my mom to an oncologist for a second appointment, and my dad sat there quiet, crying, and just did not do anything. And in that moment, I understood that I had to step up. Someone had to, and I had to be the one asking the hard questions, bottle up my own fears, and make these life-altering decisions. There was, I guess, like Smriti mentioned earlier, there's no time to process what this would mean for me. It just began. And so caregiving for me was not about just managing medical appointments or physical care. It's emotional labor, it's crisis management, it's decision making under pressure. Uh, and for me, it began in those hospital corridors when I had to emotionally caregive, I guess, not allowing myself to grieve because my family needed me to hold space for their emotions, for their pain. And I remember the only time I cried for a very long time was once during the initial diagnosis, stepped outside, quickly wiped my tears, and went back in with a straight face as though I was perfectly fine. And I remember that also, like, my family thinks I'm like a cold one, I don't have emotions. And I guess they don't see that you're bottling it all up because you don't have the privilege to do that. That was 9 years ago. Yeah, almost 9 years ago. And at first, it felt temporary. I told myself it'll last 6 to 8 months until she just recovered. But then came the relapse, then another one. And I remember the doctor pulling me aside and saying, don't get your hopes high. And I didn't have anyone to share that with because my family was too emotionally fragile, and my friends, though well meaning, could not grasp the weight of what I was carrying. So I realized at that point, this wasn't just a phase, it was my life, and this is how it's going to be. And I needed to find a balance. Try to rebuild a sense of normalcy, go back to work, see my friends, carve out space for joy. But caregiving changes you to a point where you can't recognize yourself. Within like a year of taking care of my mom, I guess I didn't recognize who I was. I felt like a whole different person. It seeps into every aspect of your life. Anxiety about my mom's health turned into anxiety about everything. My need to control her care bled into an obsessive need to control other parts of my life. And you're so used to caring for someone and then needing you that you wish other people around you also felt the same. And it's so weird. It's jarring, and an obsessive desire to show up for everyone and care for them. I think when I realized this, I was like, oh God, this is so messed up. Uh, And so in a way, caregiving becomes synonymous with your identity. My choice of career, I switched from finance to social impact. I'd always hated finance, but witnessing the disparities in healthcare access up close and combined with this deep-seated need to do work that meant something made it clear, like if I wasn't helping someone, if my work wasn't helping someone, it felt pointless, it felt purposeless. Um, so yeah, sort of seeped into my work as well. And I think people say that caregiving is a choice, and maybe in some ways it is. Actually, in many ways it is. It was a choice I made. But in my experience, it's more than that. It's a duty. It's driven by love, but also a profound obligation. With duty, there comes guilt. If I took a break, I felt the weight of potential consequences. What if something went wrong while I was not there? What if I'm too far away to try and fix it? And I don't think I trusted enough people to share this duty burden with early on. It took me a while to sort of let go of that control a little bit, but that took like it's been 9 years now, so I guess yeah, I learned it the hard way. So when I finally decided to take time for myself and pursue my master's in the US, I should have been ecstatic. Instead, in the months leading up to my departure, I was drowning in guilt, fear, panic. I think that was the first time I like fully cried, and I was like, I am so scared to leave. I probably shouldn't be doing this. And even as I packed my bags, a voice in my head kept telling me, am I abandoning her? Am I running away from this? And so, because of all of that, there's a quiet resentment that creeps in when you realize that your life is no longer your own. It doesn't feel like your own. So, on most days, while I'm loving, caring, there are moments when I'm consumed by an anger that seems very out of place. Angry at my mom for needing me, at life for dealing me these cards, at myself for making the choices that led me here. Uh, you sort of resent the person you're caring for as though they made the choice to go through excruciating pain and suffering for almost a decade. And the anger clouds your judgment. It makes you forget that they are suffering despite all your efforts. So then the guilt creeps in because how dare I feel this way when she's the one suffering? It becomes a constant cycle of endless conflicting emotions. So it's either anger, it's anxiety, it's fear, and none of them positive emotions ever. So maybe this anger stems from loneliness that comes with caregiving. It's very isolating, as Nishant mentioned, as you mentioned. Uh, People see the strength and sacrifice, but no one truly understands the exhaustion, the self-doubt, the grief that accompany it. And more often than not, we don't have people who understand the emotional and mental toll that it takes. I think probably the only person I shared it with was my therapist. But I don't think your therapist is someone you want to like. Your therapist is not your support system. Your therapist is someone you pay to listen to you. So I don't think they count as people you want to be talking about this to. So yeah, we need a supportive community, people who remind us that we don't have to do this alone. And I've come to believe that the phrase "it takes a village to raise a child" should sort of be expanded to caregiving at any age. It's not just about raising children, it's about caring for anyone who needs us, whether young or old. We can't do it alone. I don't think we should have to. And yeah, trying to figure out where I can build that community, where I can find the village. And it's been a long process. That's it, I guess, from me. I'm just going to pass it on to you, Smriti.
Wow, thank you, Najwa. I'm just trying to process what you shared, and I want to thank you really for, you said you haven't really spoken about this or processed this before, and you've had to take a pause and do it. And doing it in front of a bunch of strangers is possibly the bravest thing that you can do, which is what you have just really honored us with. Um, that analogy of driving at 100 kilometers an hour and not wanting to hit the brakes. I mean, there are so many things that you said that just really resonated with me. And, I remember as a caregiver when every time I'd go home for the chemo cycles, and I was in college as well, and every time I'd leave, I'd always wonder, is this the last time? Is this the last time? And will I not be there? And for some reason, it was always this, it was so crippling. And, I had to take a 2.5 hour flight from Delhi to Bangalore, and I'd have that time to rewire my brain. And then by the time I land in Bangalore, I better be in like academic mode. and then, and leave all that other. So I learned to compartmentalize my life, which in a way, the compartmentalization turned into fragmentation. It took a long time to reintegrate aspects of my personality. So much of what you said. And I really appreciate you shining a light on the negative emotions associated with caregiving, because especially in our culture, it is seen as an act of service, an act of duty, a sacred act. And in foisting those labels on caregivers, we do not give caregivers permission to express some of their most difficult emotions, which is actually something that needs to be processed in order for us to continue on as caregivers. And anger is a major part of it. So I really want to thank you, because it takes a lot of courage and a deep sense of vulnerability to say, anger at not just life and the cards that we were dealt, but also at the person that we actually really care about. Sometimes it's we lash out at the people we love the most, and then everyone who might be watching, says, how selfish of you. I mean, at least you have your health. So thank you very much for highlighting that particular aspect of caregiving, which I think is so important. And I think in vocalizing and articulating it, for those in the room who may never have done this before, I hope it gives them permission to also express this sense of, well, not everything is, you know, sacred, and a sense of duty. So thank you again. I will come back to you with more questions. We're going to move over now to Abhinav, and Abhinav Jyotis is a dual degree student in his second year of medical school at Kansas City University and pursuing a master's in public health with a concentration in public health administration and policy at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. In addition to his medical and public health studies, he is a professionally trained Hindustani and Carnatic classical singer and performing in India and the United States when possible. With a background in medicine, global health, and music, Abhinav hopes to bring a multidisciplinary perspective to his future in healthcare. Abhinav, one of the reasons I wanted you to be on this panel is because you have one foot in both worlds and several dual worlds, but one is, of course, you're with your Indian heritage and living in the States currently at the moment. The other is the fact that you are becoming a medical student. I mean, you're becoming a doctor, you are a medical student. And you get to see what the healthcare system looks like on both sides of the pond, so to speak. And I think that your perspective is really valuable at this point, because as young people getting into the field of medicine, I'm also curious to know, what has your experience in terms of um, your perspective as a medical student. How would you contrast what you see in the US versus India? Because I know that you shuttle between the two countries fairly regularly. And I wonder, through your medical lens, what is it that is standing out for you more and more?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the opportunity, Smriti. It's always a pleasure. I think, Nishant and Najwa shared a very personal and touching story about being a caregiver as a family member. I think, for me, I am kind of an outsider and a medical student sharing my experience of caregiving in the United States and India. I think for me, in order to kind of get into that comparing and contrasting, I think I have to first talk about how it all started. I think about 3 years ago, during one of my many trips to India, I got the opportunity to volunteer at Pallium India, and I met a lovely individual named Ajin. When I met Ajin, I met him at his bedside, and he was receiving pain management for his quadriplegia, as well as other issues that he was suffering with. I'll actually share a little photo here of me and Ajin. If you guys can see that. So yeah, this was 3 years ago, and despite the circumstances that we met, I mean, this guy was a joy. I mean, you can kind of tell with his smile. He was a lot of fun to be around. We ended up talking, the first time we met, we ended up talking for almost an hour and a half about fishing and his fascination with cars, and talking about all the movies that he watched, while he was at Pallium. And not once did he bring up anything about his pain, his condition. It was really, a beautiful conversation. But the one thing that really struck out to me during that hour and a half that we talked was, towards the end, he looked at me and he said, with like a really big smile, he said, talking with you made me forget all about my pain. And I think it was, it's a really, when I look back at it, it's always like a simple remark. It's like, barely a full sentence, but it really punched me in the gut, I think, quite literally. And I think the reason it affected me so much was because I had never connected with a patient like that before. At the time, right, 3 years ago, when I met him, I was a first responder. So I was working like, 3-4 days a week, meeting countless patients, So I thought I had a good idea of what patient care was like. I thought I had a, decent exposure of seeing, dire situations, talking with patients. But, you don't really get an hour and a half to talk with a patient when you're a first responder. In the back of an ambulance, the most that you really get is like 10 to 12 minutes. And in 10 to 12 minutes, you don't really get the time to connect with the patient. And you're more so worried about getting a set of vitals, following like a clinical protocol in your mind, and trying to make sure that they're stable. Even as today, as a medical student, as I'm preparing for, my clinical rotations in a couple of months, the medical system is highly effective, undoubtedly, but the way it is structured, it teaches you to, at the very least, gather enough medical history about a patient in a very short amount of time. And that's how the system is created, I think. In the US, as I've witnessed as a first responder and today as a medical student, it's centered around efficiency, treat the most amount of patients with the short amount of staff and then do it effectively. That's a good motto, but I think what I learned from all those years ago with meeting Ajin was that when you prioritize efficiency, you have a slight drawback, and it's that you limit the human to human interactions, like the ones that I had with Ajin. And it becomes almost robotic. For Ajin, in his case, I think he was quite lucky in many senses to be in a medical facility at the time, Pallium India, that prioritized not just his medical care, but also gave him an ecosystem to be heard. I think it was roughly a year after that I first met him that myself, many individuals in his community, as well as Pallium India, kind of came together individually, and we raised some money to build a house. And I think this second photo is taken at his housewarming event. And this was taken, I think, 2023. And that's his family on his right. And Smriti, when you asked me to talk about, like, what do you see as the difference, in America and in India in terms of caregiving, the first person I thought about was Ajin, and I try to think about how his life would have been like if he had been like me, if he had been born in America, raised here, and then had those unfortunate things happen to him. I have no doubt in my mind that he would have gotten the care that he needed. But I doubt he would have been heard while he was getting the care, excuse me. And I also doubt that he would have made the friends and connections that he did at Pallium. I also doubt that his family, himself, would have even been living in their own home. So, in the end, when I look at how things are, in the United States and here, I think the one thing that really comes to me is that you can treat any condition, any ailment for the most part. You can at least manage it. But if you can't see a patient for more than just their diagnosis, then it becomes a very lonely journey for that patient. So I'll give it back to you, Smriti.
Thank you. Thanks, Abhinav. Thanks very much. And thank you for sharing Ajin with us. What I'm taking back from your share is, the importance, like you said, of looking past the diagnosis at the person. And I think there is a difference between medical care and care for the human being. So one thing that I suppose needs to be said, if it's not already obvious, is the fact that palliative care especially is very different in the way it works in the West versus how it works in India and in other global South countries, so to speak. So like you highlighted, had Ajin been born in the US, he would have gotten a different, kind of care, which would probably be more efficient. But in countries like ours, appropriate, affordable care does not reach people adequately or in time. Or sometimes a lot of the time it becomes unaffordable beyond a point, and a person gets expelled out of the system because they can no longer afford it, or they just cannot. Something can be available but not accessible. And someone like Ajin, perhaps, maybe if he needed to go somewhere for physiotherapy and things, he would not have been able to go unless there was someone to help him get there. And therefore, the net we cast in terms of who is eligible for palliative care is much wider in countries like ours. So I see palliative care not just as something that comes later in the continuum of care in the disease trajectory, but something that actually should be adopted well in advance. And the thing is, I suppose you could look at it as a social intervention, not just a medical one. And what you just sort of highlighted through your story is that it really takes a village. Not just in raising people, but also caring for people and perhaps even walking with them towards the end of their life. So I'm often asked, okay, supporting, home renovation, how is that palliative care? But if we are to talk about palliative care as the mitigation of serious health-related suffering, the fact that somebody has a leaky roof and is expected to be taken care of in that home during the monsoon, we got to fix that leaky roof. And that is palliative care. So sometimes, the idea of what palliative care is a little bit different, very different in the West and in countries like ours. But I would say that, very often people are willing to contribute to tangible outcomes, like how many patients were seen, how much medication was handed out, those kinds of things. But this kind of social intervention, which also needs support, is a little bit harder to express. But thank you. Through your sharing today, it's been quite obvious. It's come through very beautifully, which actually segues us right into the last, to our last speaker, which is quite. I'm really delighted to introduce Adra to everybody. Adra, actually, we've not really met, but I've heard such wonderful things about the work that she's doing. And she's a passionate advocate for palliative care through her active involvement with the Students' Initiative in Palliative Care, which is SIPC. And it's really a vibrant platform of hundreds of student volunteers, which has been happening since 2008. And Adra has led activities in organizing affordable support programs for people with palliative care needs. She's also been a student leader who has helped raise awareness and sensitize communities on palliative care, engaged in patient care activities, and mobilized resources. Adra is currently guest faculty at St. Joseph's College for Women in Kerala. And Adra, I'm so happy that you're here because, we've been talking about the gaps in the system. We've been talking about what it means to have community and what it means when community is absent. And here we have a really beautiful, shining example of what community can do, and especially young people in the community who are really the custodians of, caregiving in that sense. So your experience as a student leader at the Students' Initiative in Palliative Care, Can you just tell us something about your experience and some of the examples, perhaps in ways that you have shown up for the community, which has been quite effective?
Sure, I hope I'm audible now. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much for this beautiful introduction. I'll share a PPT, okay? Just tell me if it is visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So this is actually a look back to my journey. Um, some reflections, right? Starting right from my NSS days. Yes, it started in 2017. I got selected as a student volunteer leader. I got elected as a leader. And after that, we've been doing a lot of works. And as a part of Onam celebration, we chose to celebrate it with palliative patients. And for me, palliative care or this palliative patient or the word palliative was not an alien thing because my mother, she used to work in palliative care. So I was very familiar with this word, but I got to know more about this initiative once I stepped into it. And, that was really an insightful experience for me. Like I met so many people with from different backgrounds, struggling to do day-to-day activities without someone else's help. And so we actually started giving as a student community. We were not able to help them in a massive way or anything, but we were able to collect these 1 rupee in every week, and we collected it together, and we provided a financial support, like a monthly pension to them. So they were actually anticipating us every month because when we talk about palliative care, as you already mentioned, it is sometimes it is also about making them feel that they are cared. I mean, the people around them make them a part of this community. And also the one other aspect or the initiative we introduced was the skill development training programs for those who are able to sit and work with their hands. We used to train them how to make a paper pen. We provided them with these refills and some newspapers. That's all we need to make a paper pen, and which made them feel dignified, respected. They don't have this feeling of being a burden to their family. Even in a small scale, they are able to help their family out. So that was one among them. Then we made we did workshops on paper bag making, then seed pens, like that. Then I want to mention about a girl, not a girl actually, she was a grown up woman, but she appears to a girl. She was 32 years old. Her name is Jodi. She is actually, she is autistic, and I met her at her home. Actually, it's a single parent. Her mother has to leave her alone at the home to go to work and feed her. So it was not very uh, very safe to leave her alone, because she used to get undressed and go back to her house for to take bath. Okay, so when we were visiting, she was sitting like that. She was totally naked, and we were stunned to see that scene at the age of 16 or 17. So that was kind of experience which made me think deeper and understand the importance of spreading smile to those around us. Like what we asked her, what do you want? And she didn't want any money or a big house or anything. She just pointed her fingers to the bangles, the colorful bangles we were wearing, and we gave it to her, and she was smiling with all her heart out. So spreading happiness doesn't mean giving something big or anything, just providing them with what they actually want, even it is a smaller thing or anything. yeah, coming to my college days, I really wanted to become a part of NSS, and I did it. And we made a survey on these palliative patients, and these are some pictures we took during that survey. And this grandmother, she's so cute, and I just touched her nose and told her, "You have such a cute nose," and she was smiling. So look at her cute face. She was so happy. Actually, she was having a wound. She was having a fracture on her face. She fell from the stairs, and she was having a fracture on her face. But when I told her that you have such a cute nose, she smiled without thinking about her pain or anything. That was kind of a very happy experience for me. For these patients, actually they have a very economically very stable family background and all. But when we sit with them, when we talk with them, when we give them a little massage on their hands, they get very much happy. So this is what we a student community could offer to these palliative patients. Then this one of the major programs we did in association with Pallium India, that we joined hands with Trivandrum Kite team to spread the awareness about palliative care, to introduce the initiatives or the importance of palliative care to the public. We did a survey. We were flying these kites, and the people got attracted to us, and they came and asked why you people are doing in this uniform. And then we introduced them to the palliative care. We did a survey. We asked them, whether do you have a palliative patient in your house, who, or if you don't know what is a palliative patient is, it is someone who need help to do their day-to-day activities. They cannot do it their own. So there were we have actually met a few people who had palliative patients in their home, and we also distributed the Sahayatra magazine, which is a monthly care. Palliative care monthly magazine. We distributed it among them so that they could have a deeper insight into palliative care, and if someone they know need palliative care or the help of Pallium India, we could help them out. So that was the actual theme of this, or maybe the crux idea of this particular program. And coming to my personal life, how as a student, leader, or volunteer in SIPC, it impacted in my personal life. This is my grandmother. Her name is Tangamma. Tangamma means golden woman. That's why I said looking after my golden woman. Yes, this is my grandmother, and she's holding me when I was so young. And a few months back, I was holding her like that. She was diagnosed with liver cirrhosis, and she was a lady who used to take care of the whole family without any fail. But all of a sudden, it went upside down, and she was not able to do anything, even her personal stuffs. So right after these, we have this removal or suction of excess water, these fluid from the abdomen, the tapping. After that, she was very tired, and right after that, she got a big wound of a 4-inch wound on her right leg, by an accident, and it with full of pus. And it was really hard to watch her going through that pain. And right after she got discharged from the hospital, she broke her right arm, because without one arm, without one leg, it was so hard for her to survive. But I was the one who was taking care of her. Like, because of these experiences I had, I knew what to do for them. Also, my mom, she was also such a kind person. But even the doctors, they were very they were very amazed to see a granddaughter taking care of a grandmother like this. They've seen sons or their daughters taking care, but a granddaughter in my age taking care of a grandmother with such care and with no complaints or anything. It was such a and I was able to do this without any discuss. She was not even able to go to the toilet by her own. So I used to clean her up. I used to bathe her, and it was kind of I didn't feel any disgust or anything, but because I've seen many such scenarios. I wanted to make her know that she is valued. She did take care of us, so you deserve to be taken care. And I wanted to keep her the dignity. This is her, the third picture is her sitting in a hospital ward. Okay, I just brushed her hair, put a little a bindi on her face. I wanted to make sure that she has to look exactly the same how she used to look when she was able to do everything. And these all things, how did I know? Through SIPC, the experience I gained from NSS and my volunteership in such initiatives. And thank you so much for listening to me. That was a brief look back to my journey. And this is what I have to say, a very famous quote from Helen Keller. Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much better. Together, we are sitting here for a good cause. And I strongly believe that we could bring a better, bring a big change to this world. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Adra. So inspiring and a perfect way to round off all our stories that we've heard today. We are going to go a little bit over time because I think this we could continue talking to one another for at least another couple of hours. And I had a sense of what folks were going to share here, but I mean, I have so many so many points of resonance. Um, what's really also resonating with me about your story, Adra, is the restoration of dignity and how that is so key. Like, you may not have the medical the ability to address all the medical issues, but there is nothing stopping us from making sure that a person's dignity is not um, sacrificed on the altar of treatment and disease. And no matter what, we can facilitate dignity for people, no matter what condition they might be in terms of their health. And also the fact that just presence, is such a strong remedy to loneliness and isolation, and also such a powerful source of respite for caregivers. You might have a very, very loving family, but just the tasks associated with caregiving can be so exhausting that when you do have some time to yourself, you need to just use it to rejuvenate. So having a community of young people like you come in and sit with people in the family, play games with them, engage their time, and even do things that are not treatment related is so important, because that also gives the caregiver respite. And I think that is something that all of us need to remember, that you can have a big joint family and people can still be very, very overwhelmed with the fact that there is someone so unwell at home. And it always helps to have someone from the community come in and share that burden with you a little bit. I love that story of your golden woman, Tangama. And it really speaks to the fact that, there's a quote by Ramdas: we're all just walking each other home. So those of us who were, there comes a point where we're walking our elders home. And it is a great privilege and an honor. So thank you for sharing her with us. You alluded to the fact that you were able to do this because of your experience in SIPC. And uh, what I see that as is a lesson in empathy and competence building. That, as much as we bring to the table, we get that much back as well. So in some circles, we call it the beholder's share. What you bring to a piece of music or art or poetry largely has to do with what you take away from it, largely has to do with what you bring to it. And you can apply that to caring as well. Which is also why it is so important to look after yourselves. So we have very little time left, but I just want to do a quick go around one more time. And very briefly, I'm going to just come back, Nishant, to you. I want to understand, you spoke about the hypervigilance, the lasting trauma, the need for, and I'm very glad that we are speaking about seeking professional help in helping us get through these things as well. I want to understand from you very quickly, what do you wish to see more sort of integrated into the current systems that could help support caregivers better? And I know it's a big question and in a short period of time, but if you could just say what has worked for you or what do you see has been missing and what could be integrated from your perspective?
See, in India, getting access to good quality, quote unquote, which should be basic healthcare, but good quality healthcare is a very privileged thing. And most private hospitals, if you're willing to shell money, you're willing to get those add-on services, right? But it shouldn't be like that, right? I'll take the example of AIMS, for example, right? AIMS New Delhi. If you're coming from a nuclear family and there's just one person taking care of the patient, if you have to go and get medicines, or if the doctors ask you to go and get some of the medical supplies, it's easily a 45-minute walk from where the patient is admitted to where the pharmacies are across the road, right? And if you're the only person out there, which for a few days my mother was, she had to manage that all by herself. And in that moment, you're not thinking about where your belongings are, what you're wearing, what are your requirements. You're walking and running around all over the hospital trying to get those things done. So if the things that a caregiver needs to arrange and also need for themselves, they can be well integrated, whether it's basic things like healthy meals, a place to adequately rest. A lot of times the caregivers end up picking infection from hospitals as well. And then they end up requiring medical support as well. How do you provide for that? For most of us, just the thought of not having a doctor on text, on call, whenever something happens is very harrowing, because you're so dependent on that whole system where if irrespective of whatever happens, either you go through the appointment system or you come to the emergency ward, and through that, the care system will begin. I think if we can make that process more inclusive and humane, if we can provide telemedicine services where doctors can get on calls and patients don't need to travel 12 to 16 hours from far parts of India to a metro city. Because for them, it's not just them coming to those metro cities to seek hospital care. The caretaker has to figure out where they're going to live, where they're going to sleep. And if you don't have relatives, then you're also signing up to like even every single step in this process, right? Like if you don't know how to book an Uber, then you're dependent on public transport. So that in itself becomes a huge journey. So then either the caretaker has another relative who's taking care of them, which some families have, some families don't have. So there's a lot that goes into taking care, which happens just outside the hospitals, that we don't think that well about it. These days, we are talking a lot about digitization of medical records. A lot of parents are not tech savvy. They still prefer having the paper and not having an OTP-based registration system, and they struggle with it, right? So in the name of efficiency, we are also alienating a huge section of the society that has dependent on that kind of system for the longest years. So I'm not a healthcare expert, but what I really hope is that these allied systems around hospitals, around healthcare, if they could be made more easier to access and more inclusive, also cost efficient. The number of times I've had relatives who simply keep wondering who will go and take the person to the hospital and where they will stay and how they will travel and who will arrange the medicines. A very simple example. Today, if we need blood, like I have been trying to arrange blood for a lot of people for the last decade. And sometimes it simply boils down to which WhatsApp groups you're part of. Right? In which city you have that WhatsApp group where you send someone and someone was willing enough to come and donate blood on your behalf. So these are all privileged things that many of us have and many of the people don't end up having. So how do we make this process very seamless? That coming to a hospital and getting out of it is not such a such a tough process that strips you of your dignity.
Thank you. Yes. And I will, just to quote somebody that many of us are very close with, Dr. Roop Gursahan, he says, modern day high-tech hospitals are like fortresses where the poor can't get in and the rich can't get out. And it's very telling of the current system. So thank you, Nishant. Some very tangible things that you said. Most caregivers, and I would like to eradicate the word bystander from the vocabulary of caregiving, because a bystander by definition is someone who stands by and does nothing. That's not what a caregiver is. And I think just humanizing caregivers by not calling them bystanders is the first step. But also, like you said, wholesome meals. A lot of caregivers have to spend time at the hospital and still juggle work. Could there be a place where they could quietly go and take a call, which is work related, just get a well-rounded meal without having to eat some, you know, um, unhealthy food, or basic facilities that make the process of caregiving a little bit easier. Maybe that's a small step where we could start. Thank you. Thank you, Nishant. I mean, we could go on about this, but this is also for those of you who are listening to think about. Also, I will just say that universal health coverage talks about meeting people where they are when they need it with quality, affordable care. And that way, I'm going to come back to the fact that community-based palliative care models actually do that. So every time, the thing is, we as caregivers might know the vocabulary of the disease, but we don't know when something is an emergency or not. So we err on the side of caution by rushing to the hospital, which in and of itself can be a traumatic experience. But if we are educated in caregiving at home, what is an emergency, what is not an emergency, maybe some of that stress can be pulled back. And I see this happening quite beautifully in some parts of India, especially Kerala, where, like you said, one of the things I see Adra's group doing is actually becoming the navigators of the system. So if you from Delhi cannot make it back to Dehradun in time, there's someone like Adra and her group who will go in and step in for you and say, hey, you know what? We will take your mother across. You come. And they will also help with the running around and things like that, so there are ways to integrate the system in a better way. And it will not fall on the healthcare system, but on the community to do this. So I'm just trying to tie up what you just said with what Adra's, the students group does. And maybe this is where we also sort of rely on each other a little more. I'm really mindful of the time, but I cannot not ask this question of Najwa, because I feel like one thing we haven't touched upon yet, Najwa, is the intersectionality of gender and caregiving. And I'd really like you to speak to that aspect very quickly, please.
Thanks for that. I can write an entire thesis on that. Maybe I should. So I'm going to try and keep this short. I think caregiving is deeply personal. Each person's experience is different, stems from the medical diagnosis, the treatment plan, and it's never the same for two people. So I'm not going to compare individuals' experiences, but also, and don't want to generalize and say caregiving is usually less work for men, because again, everyone's experience is different. But I will still say it, maybe. I think caregiving is fundamentally different for women. Besides making healthcare decisions, managing crisis, taking patients to the hospital, running about doing a million things at the hospital and just outside, we also do other things like help them take showers, cook for them, manage their emotions. I think cooking is like feeding people also falls upon you. Feeding them, feeding you, making sure like everyone's well fed, besides the whole emotional and other physical exhaustion. Also making sure everyone is has good, sufficient nutrition. And for most men, their career choices are not influenced by their role as a caregiver. I don't get to set boundaries with my parents or limit how often they call me from the next room. And social expectations and gender roles that you see undertaken by women around you make you feel as though this is a duty and not purely a choice. We expect it to be inherently maternal and caring. And I do often use the language and say that I'm parenting my parents and mothering my mother. I don't know how I feel about using that language. I was too young to take on a role of being a parent. I was 21 when it all started. And we don't get sick days or days off at work, at home. Just like when you're sick, you're still powering through. It also reminds me of like how this works in community, right? Like Indian aunties, and we tend to see them as nosy, but I'm also seeing how it can be a good thing. Like they check in on you from their balconies if you're missing for a day. They are concerned about your well-being. They will come knocking on your door if you've been missing for 2 days, if they don't see you for 2 days. And so there's also the systemic support that women provide in care work. You don't see I don't see men peeping up from the balcony and making sure their neighbors are fine. I think it's a very woman thing. So it's just, I think, how socially it's structured as well. And also, I guess, in terms of like how it impacts people's career, no matter what my desires are, what they have been for the last decade, my choices have been shaped by duty, by expectations so deeply embedded in the way society functions that they need not be spoken. I don't think my parents said this is what you need to do. I don't think they've ever said that. But you feel that inherently. And there was a time I'm sure I experienced like true fulfillment in terms of relational, communal, intellectual, I guess every aspect of my life that I needed, but I had to let it go. And not because I wanted to, but because I've been conditioned to believe that my absence from my mother's side was a failure of love. Um, and I guess guilt is the undercurrent of caregiving for women. It's not enough to provide care. We also must prove that we feel the burden of it. Also, again, back to like how systemic structures in terms of like work and professional choices for women. I guess these existing structures force women to navigate career paths that accommodate rather than challenge existing gender norms of caregiving. The skills you gain, which was a lot during caregiving, like strategic decision making, crisis management, emotional resilience, all of which very valuable leadership skills. Your ability to balance caregiving with professional life challenges, the idea that care work is incompatible with ambition. I mean, and when I say care work, it can be for caring for a sick loved one. It also could be caring for a child as a new parent, usually women, moms, new moms. And yet we see how all of these experiences only negatively impact a woman's career. When a man does it, it's like, wow, he's exceptional. Look at what he's doing. When a woman does it, it's not, it's, hey, well, maybe you need to take a break from your career. And so it's so annoying to see that. And we see how all of these experiences, yeah, only negatively affect women and their careers. Institutions fail to see our strength, the growth that these experiences provide to us. I do want to acknowledge that there are some companies and some countries, rather, I guess, progressive in some senses, which make accommodations for these, but not sufficiently. And this is definitely not the norm. Um, and so maybe to end with, I'll say that caregiving is an act of love, but for women, it's also an expectation that shapes our choices in ways we rarely acknowledge until they've already been made. I don't think I thought about the choices I was making, how it's going to impact my career. You were praised and sacrificed. We're praised for our sacrifices, but not supported. And we're expected to bear the weight of care without resentment, without recognition, without pause. So, I mean, what if we refuse to see caregiving as an individual burden and instead recognize as a collective responsibility, one that men in our families, men in our community actively engage in and not just acknowledge? And beyond the family, what if institutions valued caregiving not as a deviation from ambition, but as a demonstration of it? Yeah, until we change how we view support, how we view and support care work within families, communities, workplaces, policies, I think women will have to continue making these impossible choices between duty and the work that we want to do for ourselves, between love and autonomy. And the question is, should we have to? I don't know, because I look at my calendar, and that's the picture I was about to share with the audience, but I just chose to not because I felt it felt too deeply personal. It's so, there's conflict in everything. I've color coded my personal work, color coded professional work, and you see them constantly clashing, and we're still finding ways to make this work. So yeah, I guess we need to find a way to just help women not make these crazy choices. Sorry, I probably went on a tangent.
Okay, no, you did not go on a tangent. In fact, as I was listening to you, I thought to myself, thank God we recorded this so that all of us can go back and watch this recording because there is so much to take away from every single thing that all of you have said. And thank you, Najwa. I mean, what a powerful and profound perspective. Thank you for calling it out. And I think it has, I think any woman listening to you would feel it deeply in her bones, what you just said. Um, I'm also thinking of this interesting point that you made, which also ties up with what Nishant said earlier, which is um, the physical structure of caregiving. In the sense that you said aunties on the balconies, and Nishant said something else about the distance between places. What what's a half-baked thought in my head at the moment is let's start with that, like the architecture of caregiving. This is where public health services and all of us need to come together. What can we do in terms of just the physical structure of the buildings and the way in which things are laid out? Like, people pay so much. Yes, we talk about efficiency in hospitals, and I understand that hospitals are some of the most difficult places architecturally to design. I think second most stressful after an airport or something like that. But in that architectural design and structure, where is the caregiver? And I think that's something that I really want everybody to think about. Where are we placing the caregiver in the structure of the physical structure of how we lay out care systems? Whether it's a hospital, whether it's a hospice, whether it's just a nursing home. And I'm going to come across to Abhinav. And you know what? I think we just have to accept the fact that we are going over time, because I don't want to cut anyone short. And it's okay. This recording is there. It's all right. So, Abhinav, I'm coming to you to ask you. We talked about several gaps, and we already talked about some of the strengths through what Adra has said. If you could pick out one or two strengths that you see in the Indian context, I'd like you to highlight those for us.
Yeah. I think for me, if we're talking about strengths, it's quite simple. I think that the strength is in the fact that the culture is slightly different. Like when I was being born and raised in America, I think everything is largely an individualistic perspective. It fluctuates a lot. There's a lot of families that are different. There's a lot of families that really hone in on that individualism. And that sometimes in the context of like caregiving, I don't think those two, individualism and then caregiving, really coincide that well. I think there's a lot of clashes. But in India, I think that there is culturally, it's just more, it's more common to have like a group mentality. As a family, you think cohesively. I'm not going to get into like the positives and the negatives. I'm sure there's plenty to talk about, but if we're talking about the strengths, I think that when you have, say, a family mindset that's like, all right, we're going to take care of so and so person because they're part of our family, or they're just, I don't know, third cousin or a second cousin, it doesn't even matter. It could be like a huge family. It becomes very natural. That doesn't mean that there's going to be issues. I'm sure there's plenty of things to kind of iron out, but it's a little bit more easier. And I think that is a strength, fundamentally.
Thank you. Thanks, Abhinav. I think you spoke for all of us there. And while the social capital of who bridges that gap, and Anne asked a question in the chat, aren't family caregivers doing most of healthcare? Absolutely true. Family caregivers are doing most of healthcare, but how are they being compensated for it? We talk about the unpaid care that is done by women, and then it seems like a controversial conversation to some people, because it's like, how can you expect to be compensated for something that is your duty or something that you're doing for a loved one? But that is not okay, because there is a huge toll that comes along with it, a huge price tag that comes along with it. And we really need to have this conversation about, the fact that there have to be reasonable accommodations even at work, in terms of taking leave, in being paid while you have to take leave to take care of somebody, and not just during the course of care, but also after bereavement. Grief is not predictable. And you can't be given 10 days off and finish your grieving work just then. You have to be able to take that time off for yourself, maybe 6 months down the line, when it hits you like a ton of bricks. So similarly, reasonable accommodation for your mental health. You need mental health days off, just respite. You might need a room to go and cry in at work, and that should be all right. And I see a lot of, like, not just family but professional caregivers who don't have that time and space. And we talk about self-care. I would like to shift the frame of self-care. The onus of self-care should not fall on the person who is doing the caring. It has to fall on institutions which employ these people to create the spaces for self-care to be made possible. I can't say go and get a massage on Sunday, because Sunday is when you're catching up on all your laundry and medication lists and all of those things. It falls upon us as institutions to provide that space, to provide that time. And I think we need to do that because it will actually lead to more efficiency at the workplace, I think. So if you want to think about the economics of it, it's actually good for you to provide for that space. Finally, I'm going to come to Adra. Adra, I would like to just come back to one aspect and to ask you one thing. You and your team, you've already done such remarkable work. Very often, especially in our cultural context, we try and keep young people away from negative stuff like illness and death and those conversations because we think it's inauspicious and it's not something that young people should be worried about. I don't believe that at all, and I can see that you don't because you're neck deep in this work. What would you like to say to other young people, not just in Kerala, but in different parts of the world, about um, to inspire them to get involved in the kind of work that you do? Because it doesn't take up all your time, it takes up a portion of your time, and you're able to give so much. So, what would you say to other young people around the world listening to you right now?
So yeah, just getting away from this. Obviously, you have to focus on your studies, but that doesn't give you all the knowledge or information about the world in which we are living in. We need to step out of the classrooms. We need to meet with people, especially who need a help or a support. We can do a lot to them. Not, I'm not talking about the financial aspects or anything, just emotional support, just talking to them, sitting with them, spending some time with them. Maybe you could paint their walls. They are simply sitting in that four walls, they are watching this every day. Maybe you could paint it. You and your friends go to that room, you paint it, some give them some hope, some vibrant colors. They could see that every day, they could wake up watching this. That would be really nice, right? Just imagining such a scenario is bringing so much joy to me. So the littlest step that we take is actually it will make a bigger impact on other people. We could spread smile on their faces. And you see, it is not a negative thing. I really want to point out these these illness or death, these are actually the only truth that we see today. And I want these young generation of the students to get very much aware about the fact and come forward. Also, the awareness, I think it's not, it's given not to the students, I guess, to their parents, to the community, to make them know that these students are our futures. They have to come, become an empathetic individual for a better tomorrow. So we need to start right from there, then only we could make a bigger change tomorrow. So yeah, I think we the student community has a lot to do in this palliative care, and the world about to come. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Adra. Very well said. It's we have to show up, and I will. The generation above us, perhaps there was a lot of stigma around talking about these things. There was a lot of taboo around it. This conversation alone today, I mean, it really blew a lot of that out of the water. I really want to thank each and every one of you for talking about the things that you did, because there's a saying, transform or transmit. So suffering that is transmitted, it just keeps getting transmitted further. But it's up to us as our generation and I'd say I'm tying myself to Adra's generation, which I'm really not. But it's up to us to break that cycle of the conspiracies of silence around caregiving, to talk about what is necessary in order to make caregiving a more empathetic space. Some of you have woken up very early this morning, Najwa and Nishant, to be part of this conversation in spite of your caregiving duties. I couldn't thank you enough for making the time to do this, and Abhinav and Adra for sharing your insights. I'm deeply grateful for this conversation, and this has been a really wonderful way to wake up and start my day, and to think of all the, and to sit with all the reflections you've shared with us. The recording of this will be available on our social media platforms. and we will share them widely. If there are any questions, those of you watching the recording, if there are any questions that you have, please write into Pallium India, and we will be happy to respond to you. And once again, thank you, Abhinav, Najwa, Nishant, and Adra, for an absolutely beautiful hour. It was really special. And I hope you take good care of yourselves as you take care of others. So we will close out for today and see you all soon.
Thank you for having us, Smriti.
Thanks, Smriti.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
And